He bought an abandoned house in the jungle for only $100. He just wanted to renovate it for his family. But under the house, he found something that shouldn't have existed. Subscribe and write in the comments which city you're from. Michael Grayson had always believed that success was supposed to make life simpler. But in the years since he'd climbed the ranks of a San Francisco engineering firm, everything had only grown heavier. The more he earned, the less he slept. The bigger the house, the smaller it felt inside. His wife, Claire, once full of laughter and easy conversation, now seemed to speak to him mostly through screen's text reminders, short emails about bills or the children's schedules. Emily, his 16-year-old daughter, lived in a world of her own music and her friends online, while Jack, 2 years younger, had begun spending every evening behind the closed door of his room, his headphones always on. They were a family in the same house, but no longer in the same world. He often found himself sitting in the garage late at night, staring at the shelves of old tools his father had left him. A hammer, a handsaw, a box of screws neatly labeled in faded handwriting. Remnants of a man who believed in fixing things rather than replacing them. Michael had once built a small wooden canoe with those tools. He still remembered the smell of resin, the warmth of summer wood, the pride that came from creating something tangible. But somewhere between deadlines, bonuses, and promotions, that part of him had gone silent. The silence began to ache. One evening, after a long day of project reviews and back-to-back meetings, he opened his laptop not to work, but to wander. He scrolled through pages of abandoned properties, old cabins, forgotten barns, neglected estates sold for next to nothing. He didn't know what he was looking for until he found it. A low-resolution photograph of a tall white house half swallowed by greenery. The listing said, 3 stories, colonial structure, no electricity, no access road, off-map location. Title clear, $100. He laughed out loud. $100. It was absurd, probably a scam. But something in that image caught him, a strange stillness, as if the house had been waiting. The description mentioned it was somewhere in Southeast Asia, near a mountain range, where maps blurred into green emptiness. There were no guarantees of safety, no details about condition. Just a note. Owner deceased. Property transferred to local municipality. He told himself he was just curious. Yet that night, he found himself filling out forms, signing a digital agreement, wiring the symbolic payment. When the receipt arrived, it felt less like a purchase and more like a promise whispered to himself. He didn't tell Claire. How could he? She already thought he was drifting, spending too much time daydreaming about escape. He justified it easily enough. The kids would graduate soon. Claire often said she dreamed of somewhere quieter, a place by the sea or in the hills where they could breathe. This could be it, a future retreat, a project, something to look forward to when the noise of the city finally became unbearable. He imagined rebuilding it with his own hands, repairing walls, planting trees, waking up to nothing but wind and birds. He didn't know that what he was really buying was silence. 3 months later, after clearing his schedule and using the excuse of a consulting break, he boarded a plane. The journey was long San Francisco to Hanoi, then a connecting flight to a smaller city, whose name he could barely pronounce. From there, a rusted train carried him through misty hills, where each tunnel seemed to swallow the world and return it in a different century. In the final town, he hired a motorbike driver to take him as far as the path allowed. They rode for hours along dirt roads that twisted between valleys and streams. Villages appeared and vanished in seconds, children waving from stilted huts. Eventually, even the road gave up. The driver stopped, pointed toward a dark wall of forest, and said in broken English, "Old house that way. Maybe 3 hours walk. You go alone. No people there." Then he turned his bike around and left in a cloud of red dust. Michael adjusted his backpack and looked ahead. The air was dense with the scent of wet earth and decay. Vines hung low, insects droned like distant machinery. There was no cell signal, no sound of engines, only the rustle of leaves and his own breathing. He followed the faint path that wound upward, stopping occasionally to check the small printed map folded in his pocket. The line that represented his route ended abruptly, fading into blank space. It was near dusk when he finally saw it through the trees. The house from the photograph, 3 stories high, octagonal in shape, surrounded by a sea of green. White pillars rose from the overgrowth, their paint cracked and flaking, the railings wrapped in vines. Sunlight broke through the canopy, spilling over the structure like an afterthought of civilization. For a long moment, he just stood there. It was beautiful and unsettling all at once, too intact to be ruin, too silent to be alive. The path curved gently toward a moss-covered staircase that led to the entrance. He climbed slowly, each step creaking underfoot. The door was unlocked, its hinges moaning as he pushed it open. Inside, the air was cool and stale. The first floor was an open hall, lined with columns, the ceiling surprisingly high. A faint smell of rain and old wood lingered. On one side lay a broken chair, on the other, a cracked teacup filled with dust. He walked through the rooms, the beam of his flashlight tracing peeling wallpaper and empty window frames. There were no signs of vandalism, only abandonment, as if someone had left decades ago and the house had simply waited. Upstairs, cobwebs shimmered like silver threads in the dim light. In one room, he found a faded newspaper in a language he couldn't read, dated 1991. Another contained a wardrobe door leaning against the wall, and beside it, a single leather shoe covered in mildew. The second floor led to an open balcony encircled by white railings. From there, he could see the endless canopy of the jungle. It was both magnificent and isolating. As darkness fell, he decided to stay the night. He unrolled his sleeping bag in the central hall, lit a small camping lamp, and ate from a tin of beans he'd brought along. The sound of the forest swelled outside. Frogs, cicadas, the distant call of something unknown. Then, amid that chorus, came another sound. Dripping water. Slow, rhythmic, steady. It seemed to come from beneath the floor. He got up and followed the sound to one corner of the hall. The wooden planks there felt damp, slightly swollen. When he pressed his ear down, he could hear it clearly, a soft, hollow echo, like droplets falling into a cavern. Probably groundwater, he thought, or a leaky pipe from some old system. Still, it lingered in his mind as he crawled back into his sleeping bag. He couldn't sleep. The walls seemed to breathe with the night, expanding and contracting with every gust of wind. Once, half dreaming, he thought he heard footsteps on the gallery above, slow, deliberate, like someone pacing the upper floor. He told himself it was just the building settling. At dawn, light spilled through the open doorways. He rose, stretching his sore muscles, and stepped outside. Mist clung to the trees, and for the first time he saw the full expanse of the property. The house stood on a gentle slope, surrounded by a wide courtyard now buried under weeds. Beyond that lay a tangle of stone steps leading downward, vanishing into the jungle. The structure was elegant despite its decay, the columns weathered, but proud. It didn't look like a ruin. It looked like a secret. He made coffee on his small gas stove and sat on the steps, watching the light shift through the trees. It struck him how quiet everything was, not the silence of emptiness, but of something waiting. He thought of Claire and the kids, of how he'd tell them about this place when he returned. He imagined fixing it slowly, room by room, transforming it into a retreat where they could rediscover each other. Later that morning, he began to explore in earnest. He cleared vines from the outer walls, swept leaves from the entrance, propped open windows to let in the air. Inside one of the ground floor rooms, he noticed faint pencil marks on the plaster near the doorway. Dates, written in careful handwriting, followed by short phrases in a language he didn't recognize. The last date read, 1983. Underneath it, 2 letters stood alone. HN. He took a photograph with his camera and made a note in his journal. The initials meant nothing to him then, but they would soon mean everything. As the day wore on, he felt a quiet contentment he hadn't known in years. There was no signal, no clock, no noise. Only the rhythm of his breath and the rustle of leaves. When evening came, he cooked a simple meal, wrote a few lines in his notebook, and lay down again on the floor of the hall. Before closing his eyes, he whispered to himself, "This place was worth it." Somewhere beneath him, the dripping water continued, patient, steady, eternal. When morning came, Michael woke to the scent of damp wood and the pale shimmer of fog crawling through the doorways. The house seemed quieter than before, yet its silence felt heavier, as if something unseen had drawn closer during the night. He made coffee on his portable stove, the steam curling into the chill air, and then took his mug to the steps outside. The mist drifted slowly through the trees, revealing the overgrown courtyard and the faint outline of the stone path that led away from the house. It wasn't on the map, but now that he was here, it didn't feel like a place that could ever be mapped. It felt ancient, forgotten, and strangely aware. He set to work after breakfast, determined to restore a little order to the chaos that surrounded him. Using an old machete he'd found in the shed, he began cutting back vines that had wound themselves through the railings and around the columns. The work was physical, repetitive, almost meditative. With every swing, green fragments fell away, revealing hints of white beneath the dirt and moss. The more he uncovered, the more the house seemed to brighten, as if grateful to be seen again. It was exhausting work, but it filled him with a quiet sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. Each cleared step, each patch of sunlight breaking through the canopy, felt like a small victory. By midday, he had uncovered an entire section of the courtyard. Beneath the dense layer of weeds, he discovered flat stone tiles laid in a careful pattern. He knelt to brush away the dirt with his hands, tracing the intricate geometric design beneath. The craftsmanship was beautiful, older than he expected, too fine to belong to an ordinary rural home. He wondered who had built it, and for what purpose. The thought gave him pause. It wasn't just a house lost in the forest. It was a fragment of a story, and he had stepped into the middle of it. That evening, when he returned inside, he noticed the air felt different. The walls, the floor, the very beams above him seemed to hum faintly. He couldn't explain it, but it reminded him of the feeling you get standing beside a running engine. The vibration too low to hear, but strong enough to feel in your bones. When he turned off his lamp, the darkness pressed in around him, thick and almost tactile. Somewhere, deep beneath the floorboards, came that steady rhythm of dripping water again. He listened for a long time before falling asleep, and in the haze between waking and dreams, he thought he heard the softest whisper of movement, like something shifting in the deep places below. The following days followed a rhythm of their own. He woke early, worked through the daylight, and spent his evenings exploring the house. Slowly, the structure revealed itself. The upper floors had long corridors and symmetrical rooms, all built with precision and care. In one of them, behind a warped wooden panel, he found an old notebook, its pages sealed together with damp. When he pried it open, he saw writing in delicate cursive, faded, but still legible. It was a diary. The first entry was dated 1981. The name on the inside cover read, Lan Nguyen. The handwriting was graceful, deliberate, with careful English phrases interwoven among the native words. "My husband," the entry began, "says we will have water here soon. Real water. Not from the sky, but from the earth itself. He says the mountain holds a secret vein that can bring life to the villages below." There were sketches of pipes and valves, notes about measurements, and then pages later, a change in tone. "He works day and night now. He says the water listens, that it moves when he speaks. I don't know what that means. The sound beneath the floors grows louder each night." Michael read on, feeling the hairs rise on his arms. The later entries became erratic, the handwriting jagged, uneven. "The house breathes," one said. "It answers when I pray. He is not the same man. He says the source is awake, and we must be careful not to anger it." The final page was dated in late 1983. The ink was smudged, the words hurried. "He went down again. The door is sealed. If anyone finds this, leave the water where it sleeps." Then nothing. He sat in silence for a long time after reading those words. The rational part of his mind searched for explanations. Perhaps the husband had gone mad from isolation. Perhaps the wife's words were the product of grief or fear. But another part of him, deeper and less certain, felt something else. That he was not alone in this house, and that its silence was not emptiness, but attention. The initials he had seen carved on the wall downstairs, HN, now made sense. Huang Guiyan, the geologist who had built the house. It had been more than 40 years since the last entry in that diary, yet the faint echo of their lives still lingered. He could almost imagine them moving through the halls, her setting the table, him descending into the basement, confident he would return. Somewhere, deep below, the drip of water continued, steady as a heartbeat. That night he could not resist searching for the source. He took his flashlight and descended into the lower level. The staircase leading to the basement was half collapsed, the wooden steps soft with rot. He knelt at the bottom and swept aside dust and rubble until he found what he was looking for. A large stone slab, rectangular and smooth, embedded in the floor. The dripping sound came from beneath it. He pressed his palm to the surface and felt a faint, cool vibration, as if something living stirred below. The slab bore no handles, only a shallow indentation at its center. It looked less like a door and more like a seal. He told himself he would come back with better tools, but even as he turned away, he felt the house exhale. The air shifted slightly, as though acknowledging his discovery. He went to bed uneasy and dreamed of water rising through the cracks in the tiles, flooding the halls, filling every room with silver light. When he woke, the world outside had changed again. The courtyard seemed greener, brighter. The plants around the house somehow thriving overnight. Flowers he hadn't seen before had opened along the path, pale blue petals trembling in the breeze. It should have been beautiful, but there was something uncanny about it. He crouched to examine one bloom and noticed fine droplets of moisture clinging to its leaves, though it hadn't rained. The ground was damp, the air heavy with the scent of fresh water. The dripping below had stopped. He spent the day working on the balcony, clearing out debris. As he moved a pile of decayed boards, he found a rusted metal canister wedged between beams. Inside it was a photograph, half ruined by time. It showed a man and a woman standing before the house, smiling proudly. Behind them, the forest was thinner, the sky clear. On the back, someone had written in faint pencil, "Lan and Huang, 1969, our beginning." Beneath that, a single line in smaller letters, "May the house guard what we found." Michael stared at the image for a long time before placing it carefully on the table. The year caught his attention. 1969. That meant the house had stood here for more than half a century, long before modern development reached these hills, yet no one in the nearest village had known of its existence. How could a house this large, this carefully built, simply vanish from record? It was as if time had erased it on purpose. That evening, the dripping sound returned. It was louder now, and with it came a faint hum, steady, rhythmic, like a pulse echoing through stone. He turned off his lamp and listened. The vibration seemed to travel through the floorboards, up the pillars, into the very air. When he spoke softly, "Who's there?" The sound changed pitch, deepening for a moment before settling again. His breath caught in his throat. He whispered another word, and again the tone shifted slightly, almost as if responding. He spent the rest of the night sitting awake, the diary open beside him, the flashlight beam resting on that last warning. Leave the water where it sleeps. But he couldn't. Something inside him, a need to understand, to finish what they had begun, was stronger than fear. He had come here to build a future, but now he felt drawn backward into the buried heart of the past. In the days that followed, he prepared to open the slab. He reinforced the supports in the basement, cleared debris, and brought down his tools. Each evening, before he left the lower level, he felt the same vibration under his boots, steady and warm. The sound had rhythm now, almost human, like a breath echoing through stone. Once, while wiping dust from his face, he thought he heard a voice just beneath the threshold of hearing. A wordless murmur that faded the instant he turned his head. By the 5th day, he had convinced himself it was imagination. Yet the plants outside kept blooming unnaturally fast, and the air around the house grew thick with humidity. At night, condensation gathered on the windows, and he could trace patterns of moisture on the glass, shapes that resembled fingerprints. The house was no longer just standing there, it was watching. He dreamed often of the couple from the photograph. In his dreams, the man was younger than in the picture, his eyes fever bright, his hand stained with clay. He stood by the slab, whispering into the stone as if speaking to something beneath it. The woman stood in the doorway, her face pale, pleading for him to stop. Then came the roar of rushing water, and the dream would end in a flash of white light. Each time Michael woke, his chest ached, as though he'd been holding his breath for hours. One evening, as he worked by lantern light in the main hall, a sudden breeze swept through the open doorway, scattering his papers. The diary fell to the floor, its pages fluttering open to one he hadn't noticed before. A small note, written in the margin, caught his eye. If the water sleeps, it dreams. If it wakes, it remembers. The handwriting trembled, as though written in haste. He didn't know what it meant, but it filled him with a quiet dread. He closed the diary and looked toward the basement door, the dark mouth yawning below. Whatever waited there had been asleep for decades, and something told him that his presence had already begun to stir it. That night, as he stood at the edge of the courtyard watching the moon rise through the mist, he made his decision. He would uncover the slab completely and see what lay beneath. He told himself it was reason, curiosity, engineering instinct. But deep down he knew it was something else. A pull, a calling. The house had listened long enough. Now it was his turn to answer. He extinguished the lanterns and walked back inside. The air was thick, humming softly. He could almost feel the pulse beneath the floor, beating slow and sure like a living heart. Tomorrow, he thought, he would go down there. Tomorrow, the house would reveal its truth. And as he drifted into uneasy sleep, the sound of the water rose once more, echoing faintly through the night, not as a drip, but as a whisper, a low, drawn-out sigh that seemed to shape itself into words only the dark could understand. The morning came gray and heavy with mist. Michael stood at the edge of the basement, staring at the stone slab that had haunted his dreams for nights. The air was cool and smelled faintly of metal and earth. It had rained lightly before dawn, and the droplets still clung to the edges of the doorway, catching the pale light like trembling glass. He took a deep breath, shouldered his pack, and descended the creaking steps. The lantern's glow cut a narrow path through the shadows, illuminating the dust that hung suspended like smoke. He felt the weight of the house pressing above him, as if the structure itself leaned down to watch what he was about to do. He ran his hands along the stone, feeling the faint groove he had uncovered earlier. The surface was smoother now that he had brushed away the grime, and under his fingertips it seemed warm. Not from the air, something deeper. He knelt, placed the lantern beside him, and began clearing the debris around the edges. Each movement echoed in the silence like the toll of a bell. When the last of the rubble was gone, he pried at the seam with a crowbar. At first, nothing. Then, slowly, with a sighing sound that made his skin prickle, the slab shifted. A rush of cool, damp air escaped from below. The scent that rose was unmistakable. Water, old and mineral-rich. The smell of deep earth untouched by sunlight. He leaned closer and saw darkness extending downward, a tunnel carved in stone. He hesitated, remembering the line from the diary, "Leave the water where it sleeps." But the words felt distant now, like the echo of a warning he was no longer capable of obeying. Curiosity, that small spark that had driven his entire life, burned stronger than caution. He fixed a rope to a beam, looped it around his waist, and lowered himself through the opening. The descent was slow. The walls of the passage were slick with moisture, carved smooth by water or human hands. It was impossible to tell. His lantern threw long, quivering shadows that moved like breath. The air grew cooler the deeper he went, and the sound of dripping water gave way to a soft, steady murmur, as if an underground river flowed somewhere close. When his boots touched the ground, he found himself standing in a wide chamber. The space felt ancient. Arches of rough stone rose into darkness, and beneath them ran a narrow stream of crystal-clear water winding through the floor. In the center of the chamber stood a structure. Metal and stone intertwined, half engine, half sculpture. It resembled a pump system, though its design was older than anything he recognized. Pipes extended into the walls like roots reaching for sustenance. The base was carved with the initials he had seen before. HN and a date, 1969. He stepped closer, the beam of his light gliding over the corroded metal. The machinery looked dead, but something about it resisted decay. It stood as though waiting for a hand to awaken it. Michael set his tools down and began inspecting the mechanism. The engineer in him took over, methodical and precise. He brushed away mineral deposits, checked the joints, turned the rusted bolts with cautious pressure. There was a rhythm to it, a sense of purpose that steadied him. Hours passed unnoticed. He wiped the sweat from his brow, the air heavy but strangely invigorating. The vibration he'd felt through the floor upstairs was stronger here, pulsing faintly through the ground. It felt alive. When he poured a small amount of water from his canteen onto one of the pipes to test the seal, the droplets slid along the metal and vanished as though absorbed. A low hum rippled through the air, faint at first, then clearer, a resonant tone like the deep note of a cello. He froze, staring at the machinery. The water in the narrow channel began to move faster, swirling around his boots, whispering against the stones. Then it subsided, leaving only the echo of that sound, fading into silence. He stood motionless for a long moment, heart pounding. Rational thought struggled against instinct. Perhaps air pockets, he reasoned, or the metal reacting to moisture. But deep down, something older than reason stirred, a sense that the house, the land beneath it, the water itself, had been waiting for this contact. He tightened his grip on the wrench and whispered into the stillness. "What did you find, Huang?" His voice bounced softly against the walls and was swallowed by the darkness. He worked until evening, tightening fittings, clearing valves, restoring the connection between the upper and lower pipes. When he finally turned the main lever, there was a shudder, a groan of metal, and then the unmistakable sound of movement. Water surged through the system, rushing upward through channels unseen, filling the silence with a living roar. The floor trembled slightly, and droplets fell from the ceiling like rain. Michael laughed aloud, a sound of pure disbelief and relief. It worked. After all these decades, the old mechanism still worked. He climbed back up the rope, his lantern swinging wildly as the vibration intensified around him. The air felt different, charged, almost electric. When he emerged into the basement, the sound of flowing water followed him, echoing through the foundation. Outside, the courtyard gleamed under a thin veil of mist, and he could hear the faint trickle of streams forming where there had been only dust. He stepped outside and saw them, thin rivulets of water running along the stone paths, weaving around the columns, shimmering in the twilight. The house seemed to exhale, its walls damp and shining as though reborn. He walked slowly through the garden, watching as the plants seemed to lift their heads toward the sound. Leaves unfurled, blossoms opened, and the air filled with a scent so clean it made his eyes sting. He realized with a shock that he was standing in the middle of something extraordinary. Something alive, not metaphorically, but literally. The system Huang had built had tapped into a natural vein of water that breathed with the rhythm of the earth itself. And now, awakened, it was feeding everything it touched. He returned inside to record his findings, setting up his camera on the table. His voice, steady at first, trembled as he spoke. "The pump is functional. It's drawing water from an underground source I can't yet identify. The flow pressure is consistent. No mechanical leaks. It feels self-sustaining." He paused, glancing toward the open door, where the sound of the water filled the night. "I think it's more than a pump. It's a living system. It's part of the house. Maybe the reason it's still standing." As he spoke, a flicker of movement caught his eye. On the far wall, near the staircase, the moisture had condensed into a thin stream that traced patterns along the plaster. He stepped closer. Breath held. The droplets gathered, formed lines, and began to shape letters slowly, unevenly, but unmistakably. It was a word. Home. The letters lingered for a moment, then dissolved back into the wall. He stumbled backward, heart racing, and turned off the camera. The silence that followed was immense. That night, he sat by the open door and watched the courtyard shimmer in moonlight. The water flowed quietly, reflecting the stars. It should have frightened him, but it didn't. There was something comforting in the rhythm, a sense of being part of something vast and benevolent. He thought of Claire and the children, of how he had dreamed of building a place where they could find peace. Perhaps this was it, he thought, a home that listened, a home that remembered. But as the hours passed, a low rumble began to rise from the depths. It was different from the steady pulse of the pump, deeper, older. The ground trembled faintly beneath him. He went to the basement and felt the heat radiating from the floor. The air shimmered, the walls glistening with moisture. He realized with a cold certainty that the system was expanding, the pressure building. The underground water was no longer dormant. It was awake, alive, answering the call he had unknowingly made. He grabbed his tools and descended again, the roar growing louder with every step. The chamber below glowed faintly, the metallic structure pulsing with light. The stream had widened into a pool, its surface trembling. He approached the machinery, shouting over the noise, trying to close the main valve, but the lever resisted. The metal was hot under his hands, vibrating with power. For a moment he thought he saw movement within the water, a shimmer like the reflection of a face. Then, abruptly, the sound began to subside, the vibration easing, the glow dimming until only the soft whisper of water remained. In the silence that followed, he noticed a small box lodged between two pipes, half buried under sediment. He pulled it free and opened it carefully. Inside lay a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. The handwriting was familiar. It matched the diary. "If you are reading this," it said, "then the house breathes again." Huang believed the water was a gift, but gifts have memory. Treat it kindly. Let it live, and it will protect you. Anger it, and it will remember. Below the note was a single sentence written in trembling script. He never returned, but I think he became part of what he loved. Michael sat there for a long time, the note trembling in his hands. When he finally climbed back up, dawn was breaking over the hills. The air was cool, filled with the scent of wet earth. The courtyard glittered with dew, the house gleaming softly in the light. He stood at the threshold, exhausted but calm. The danger had passed, or perhaps the house had simply accepted him. He spent the next few days cleaning, repairing, tending to the garden that now seemed to grow by the hour. Birds returned to the eaves. Insects hummed along the water's edge. At night, he wrote letters to Claire he might never send. "I found something alive here," he wrote in one. "Not a ghost or a myth, but life itself. When the time comes, you'll see what I mean." He left the note on the table, next to the diary, as if the house itself might read it. On the last morning before he planned to leave, he walked to the edge of the forest and looked back. The house stood serene, bathed in light, the streams around it glimmering like veins of silver. It no longer looked abandoned. It looked complete. He smiled, understanding at last that what he had uncovered was not a ruin to be restored, but a living thing to be respected. The house had waited decades for someone to listen, and now it could rest. As he turned to go, the breeze carried the faint sound of water laughing through the stones, like a voice bidding farewell. He paused, whispered softly, "Thank you," and started down the trail toward the world he had left behind. Behind him, the house that wasn't on the map stood quietly amid the forest, its heart of water beating once again beneath the earth, eternal and awake. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Check out the other videos on the channel for more incredible stories like this, and share this video with someone who loves uncovering the unexpected.